That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, I could not be more excited for this video, and it's honestly not for the reason that y'all are assuming. I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, Mason, of course, everybody likes a good old buy low video, but the reason I'm excited is I get to reveal some of the research that we have done, a small portion of the research that we have done for our upcoming, I don't even know what we're going to call it. I'm sure a lot of y'all know this by now, but I've been spending pretty much every waking hour working on this Dynasty draft guide, Dynasty research book. I don't know what you're going to call it, but nonetheless, we have some research here that is going to be available in that book, of course, with so many others. We'll have announcements about that hopefully later this month. But nonetheless, we are going to be looking at buy low wide receivers from the 2021 draft class. And a big thing is that a lot of people have kind of begun to realize that buying low on the rookie after their failed rookie season, a lot of times isn't a great idea. I mean, I used to make this mistake very often. And of course, I still make mistakes today, but I mean, very similar to like the online poker community, very similar to the DFS community. Overall, I think the Dynasty community has just gotten smarter and smarter and smarter, where I mean, not only myself, but everybody has improved, and we've all fixed the inefficiency of going and paying the premium for those wide receivers going into year two that had the failed rookie season. The perfect example of this would be Corey Davis. I mean, if y'all remember, after 2017, Corey Davis was still a wide receiver that held a tremendous amount of value. Corey Davis, his rookie year, did absolutely nothing. Juju Smith-Schuster put up one of the best rookie wide receiver seasons of all time, considering the fact he was 20 years old. If you looked at his efficiency and you looked at his age-adjusted production, he was out there breaking records for how young he was. And that offseason, half the Dynasty community still preferred Corey Davis over Juju Smith-Schuster. The game's evolved a lot. People have gotten significantly smarter. So what we have seen is these wide receivers, after they fail their rookie season, they do not hold the value as they once did. I mean, we saw this recently. Perfect example, Jalen Reagor in 2020. Jalen Reagor disappoints, and instead of him all of a sudden, I mean, still being worth, say, an early second round rookie pick, no, you cannot get that for Jalen Reagor. People understand that the hit rates for those players that fail in year one, they're very low historically. So this information that we are going to present isn't exactly new for the first round. However, once we get to the later on rookies, I think this is something that not a lot of people focus in on. And of course, before we get into it, please go down there, drop a like on this video, leave a comment letting me know what you're thinking about these buy low wide receivers, or if there's anybody that you want me to talk about going forward, and subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. But let's pull this up, and let me first get a list of failed rookie wide receivers. There weren't that many of them. I mean, if we just pull up, I mean, Dynasty League Football ADP from last June and look at these top wide receivers. Jamar Chase, currently the #1 wide receiver in Dynasty. I mean, you had Devonta Smith as well. I'm not going to include Smith on this list. I think that his values mainly remain the same. So are we buying low on Devonta Smith? No. And then also Jalen Waddle, who of course has skyrocketed in rankings. So really the only failed wide receivers that we have to look at, Rashad Bateman, Rondelle Moore, Terrace Marshall, Cadarius Tony, and Dyami Brown. Those are going to be players that you can get at a cheaper price point this offseason than you would have been able to get last offseason. And I want to break these players into their groups. And one of the most surprising findings from this research is how predictive wide receiver seasons are in year two based on their rookie year. Now, of course, we could have done this from a points per game standpoint, but Dynasty is all about value, and we have to take into consideration injuries, situations, which value does. I mean, everybody in the Dynasty community understands that Rashad Bateman missed the beginning of the year with his groin injury. So his value is going to be represented with that, where maybe his raw fantasy points wouldn't have been. So we're looking at all historical data here from 2014 from DLF ADP. And what I decided to do is get the mark of every rookie wide receiver since 2014, including 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2020. We got a lot of wide receivers on this list. We broke them down into different groups. We're looking at round 1 wide receivers, not in the NFL draft, however, in Dynasty rookie drafts, and round 2 wide receivers. And I even broke it down further than that because we have such a large sample. That's something we can do. We're looking at those elite wide receiver prospects, the middle of the first round wide receiver prospects, and late round 1 rookie wide receiver prospects. And we have to ask ourselves, where were these players going? Specifically, 1 quarterback formats. Rashad Bateman, Rondell Moore, late first round. Terrace Marshall, mid-second. Cadarius Tony, mid-second. Dymie Brown, he was a 3rd rounder. So if we break these wide receivers down into these buckets, let's have Bateman, Rondell Moore, evaluate them as they stand. Terrace Marshall, Cadarius Tony, evaluate them afterwards, and then Dymie Brown at the very end. And first off, let's pull up this information that we have for late round 1 rookie wide receivers and the historical trends that we have found with their value. So 50% of the time, these wide receivers are going to gain value after year 1. I mean, that's something that we have seen with guys like Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Odell Beckham Jr., yada, yada, yada. There are a lot of these players. That's not that important, that, I mean, 42% of them gain value after year 2. I mean, come on, let's not focus in on that. What we need to focus in on is the continued trend mark here for these wide receivers. So what we did is if the wide receiver lost value in year 1 and then continued to lose value going into year 2, which would represent a wide receiver that you bought low on, and I mean, you didn't buy at the lowest point, he kept on falling. Or if the wide receiver gained value after their rookie season and continued to gain value going into year 3 after their 2nd year, those are players that are continuing the trends of their first seasons. So this is essentially the historical probability of Rashad Bateman and Rondell Moore to continue to lose value. That mark was at 85.7% for late round 1 wide receivers. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Mason, that's so specific. Are we looking at too small of a sample? Let's go to mid round 1 wide receivers. That continued trend mark was at 61%. I mean, if we go to early round 1 wide receivers, that continued trend mark was at 80%. So on average, about 70% of the time, when you think you're buying low on a failed round 1 rookie wide receiver, you are making a bad bet. Now, I don't want to stop there because, of course, we can look at these historical trends. And while I definitely want to use them to guide our overall judgment, still, I mean, each player is in their own individual situation, and we need to be at least aware on how the Dynasty community has changed and how I previously said at the beginning of this video that a player like Rondell Moore is another great example. If Rondell Moore would have failed 3 years ago, maybe he would have lost 20% of his value after his rookie season. Whereas Rondell Moore fails now, and he's worth not even half of what he previously was. So I don't want to just say, well, with this continued trend metric for wide receivers in this historical range, we're off of Rondell Moore, because I don't think that's painting the full picture. Let's actually dive in to what Rondell Moore did his rookie season, and let's try to project this going forward. Now, before we look at the stats, let's paint the overall picture of Arizona. With Kyler Murray going down, this offense was able to at least stay respectable, but of course they weren't the same team without Kyler Murray. And going forward, I think Rondell Moore is not only going to be playing with a better quarterback most of the time, as Kyler Murray should not get injured the majority of seasons, but at the same time, he's going to be seeing more snaps and a higher percentage of the overall team's offense. Because if we look at this Arizona Cardinals receiver room, I'm sure that at this point, everybody saw Christian Kirk having dinner with Josh Allen. And of course, that's not saying Kirk is going to Buffalo, but there is a possibility that Christian Kirk is gone this offseason. He is going to be a free agent. Also, AJ Green, not under contract this upcoming year. They did decide to draft Rondell Moore in the 2nd round. So, I mean, there's a pretty good chance that Rondell Moore has the opportunity at the minimum to turn himself into an every down player going into year 2. And at the same time, this should be an improved offense as well. I liked Rondell Moore from an overall metric perspective. I mean, this is a wide receiver that was dominant in terms of his overall breakout age. I mean, just fantastic at Purdue. Not only was he fantastic at Purdue, but getting drafted in the second round with the elite athletic profile. Really the only question marks you had with Rondell Moore: the size, the usage, and the injuries. I mean, they all kind of go together, where we don't know how a 5'7", 181-pound wide receiver is going to get used. Now, Cliff Kingsbury did show us some interesting things, but at the same time, he kept Rondell Moore off the field for a long portion of his rookie season. If we're looking at the exact stat line we had, 14 games played, honestly, I'm kind of surprised to see 54 receptions. Of course, that's not a crazy number by any means. It's less than 4 receptions a game, but it's at least something. Now, he does end up coming away with only 1 receiving touchdown, and 1 receiving touchdown off of 64 targets isn't going to maintain. That touchdown rate is going to have to come up. Now, I will say, historically, we should expect that Rondell Moore has a much lower touchdown rate than league average based on his size and the assumption on how he's going to be used in this Arizona Cardinals offense. So he does have the touchdown boom, most likely in his range of outcomes in the future. He ended up getting 76 rushing yards through 14 games. Now, we have to ask ourselves, can we ignore the historical trends that we have had for these players to try to profit on Rondell Moore in current Dynasty startups as well as in Dynasty trades? Because if I'm pulling up where Rondell Moore, according to DLF ADP, is going right now, I don't think we can take this price point. Rondell Moore, as of February 25th on DLF.com, their ADP, using this ADP source, not a promotion or anything, but just getting outside of that flock bubble, as we always talk about, which I have an issue staying in our own little flock bubble. But going as the wide receiver 39, literally back-to-back picks with Leonard Fournette in ADP, going ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster, going ahead of Pat Freiermuth, going ahead of Dallas Goedert, going ahead of Cadarius Tony, going ahead of Tony Pollard, ahead of Noah Fant. I can't get here with Rondell Moore. I apologize, but I'm probably not going to be buying low on Rondell Moore. And a very similar story here with Rashad Bateman. With Bateman, he falls into this same exact range. He ends up losing value after his rookie season. We can blame it on the injuries. We can blame it also on the injury to Lamar Jackson. There, are a lot of different variables moving in Baltimore. But if we're looking at that continued trend mark of 85% for these late round 1 wide receivers, and even if we want to expand the scope just to include all round 1 wide receivers and not even only look at late round 1, the continued trend mark is 70%. So historical baseline, 70% chance that Rashad Bateman just continues on the same path of losing value. And if we look at the situation in Baltimore as well, I've said this a lot on Patreon, but what has to happen? This is not going to be an offense that has a lot of passing volume. Mark Andrews is going to be the number 1 receiving option. And to go along with this, despite what anybody else says, Hollywood Brown's not going to all of a sudden quit football to play video games. Hollywood Brown's posturing for a new contract. He was drafted in 2019. This is the last year of his deal. He wants a new deal. So please keep that in mind. I think with Rashad Bateman, I don't want to say best case scenario, he is the second receiving option on a bottom half NFL passing offense, but that's what it is. Is anybody going to make the argument that he can ever overcome Mark Andrews? And that's not happening. So with Rashad Bateman, he's another example of a player. If we're looking at this ADP, he is going currently back-to-back with DeAndre Hopkins. You have Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, then Rashad Bateman. You have Rashad Bateman going ahead of A.J. Dillon, Josh Jacobs, and T.J. Hawkinson in this ADP set, and Michael Carter. No, these wide receivers are still being drastically overvalued. Now, let's go to some players that I think we actually have the chance to buy low on. And this is some of the most surprising information that I actually have drawn so far from our book, which we got a lot that we can talk about in the future. And of course, I'll let y'all know where y'all can get that book when it's available. But is the transition from really never wanting to buy low on those round 1 failed rookie wide receivers to these round 2 rookie wide receivers you can go after. Where Terrace Marshall and Cadarius Tony were going in drafts, it's just a completely different nature than what we saw with these round 1 guys. If we pull up early round 2, the continued trend mark is going to be 58.3%. Now, of course, you see that's lower than what we had in any portion of round 1. And we go down to mid round 2. Now, this is, of course, small sample, randomness, yada, yada, yada. But look at this graph for mid 2 wide receivers and what their value did with DLF ADP. 0% of the time did we see that continued trend. And of course, it's a small sample. If we, have 100 more years of the NFL, these numbers are going to look different. It's not going to be 0%. But the sharp contrast that we have here from these round 2 wide receivers, where you actually have the opportunity and it makes sense to buy low on them. Like, let's go and let's look at some examples of wide receivers that lost value their rookie year, then gained it the following. You have Curtis Samuel, you have Zay Jones, players that maybe didn't necessarily pan out in the long run, Laviska Shenault as well, but they had some positive buzz about them, and just showing anything in year 2 better than what they had in year 1 actually allowed them to progress with their value. So a big thing here is just identifying those players that we believe can get a little bit of buzz circling around them. Going and looking at late round 2 wide receivers as well, just so we can continue to expand this overall sample. The continued trend mark here is 42.3%. That continued trend mark is, again, lower than 50%, indicating that you can go and try to buy low on these failed round 2 rookie wide receivers. And I haven't seen a lot of people talking about the exact details on, hey, don't buy low on guys in general, or maybe don't buy low on the round 1 rookie players that were drafted because they perceived to have the talent and were going to get the opportunity right away. Whereas these guys that went in round 2, maybe they were a little bit of a longer term options in the NFL. And if you fell to a portion in the NFL draft and a portion in rookie drafts where maybe it was because you weren't going to get on the field right away, like you have Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore ahead of you, then you can still represent a long-term value in Dynasty. And I think that's exactly what we have here with Terrace Marshall. Because if we look at the strong difference in the fall off in value that we have had from some of these guys, like, Rashad Bateman, who's going back-to-back in drafts with DeAndre Hopkins, and Terrace Marshall, who's currently going behind Darrell Henderson in drafts. Y'all know you can get Terrace Marshall for literally nothing. I've seen people talking about cutting Terrace Marshall. I don't understand it. With Marshall, he did absolutely nothing his rookie season, and he is most likely not going to pan out. But for us to just look at a wide receiver that was able to get on the field and produce alongside Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, I think that's an impressive mark. And he's 6'2", 205, has the athletic profile, as we've discussed before. Had the collegiate production, was able to get on the field with the best wide receivers in the NFL around him and produce. Are we sure it's time to give up on Terrace Marshall, especially with this information that we're looking at saying these round 2 rookie wide receivers are probably the guys we want to be buying low on? And we're looking at information from 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Information that, if anything's a little bit outdated, because usually these players didn't fall in value as much their second seasons as they do now. So Terrace Marshall, if we were playing 5 years ago, maybe he wouldn't be that great of a buy because his price would be similar to what it was in rookie drafts. But at this point, it's nothing. It's free. He's a throw-in. You can sometimes get him off the waiver wire. I think Terrace Marshall is a great guy to get thrown into trades. And Cadarius Tony, I don't want to say the same exact mark with this, because if we look at Cadarius Tony with his current value, he's definitely going much higher in drafts currently than Terrace Marshall. And with Cadarius Tony, another interesting case in terms of a polarizing prospect coming in, but someone that did lose a little bit of value after his rookie season. If you're looking at that June ADP that falls into this mark. Now, there's so much uncertainty with Cadarius Tony, but what I will say is this is a wide receiver that went for 189 receiving yards his rookie season in a single game. And then directly after that, in one drive, he had 3 receptions to open the game. I believe that was against the Rams. This is all the top of my head. So please, if I have a detail or two wrong here, don't get too mad at me. But had 3 receptions on a single drive to open the game. That I know is 100% fact. And then goes down for a long injury. By the time he comes back into the offense, the offense is completely cratered. You got a Saquon Barkley injury. You got Daniel Jones gone. You have Mike Glennon coming in, and Mike Glennon literally making this the worst offense in the NFL. There were games they weren't getting to 100 passing yards. I don't think he had a fair shot to actually ever really succeed. Now, of course, new coaching staff coming in. We don't know their exact plans with Cadarius Tony. He wasn't a great prospect coming out of Florida, but he was a little bit more of an interesting player where he wasn't a prototypical wide receiver, more so drafted based on his athletic profile, but he did flash his rookie season. This is another guy that I think we saw enough from. If they don't just go out of their way and heavily invest into the wide receiver position by taking someone like Treylon Burks in the first round, I think Cadarius Tony could be an intriguing buy low candidate as well. I like the idea at this point when all these rookies fall so much in value after their first failed season. Instead of buying those names that people are familiar with, someone like Rashad Bateman at a price similar to what he was going in rookie drafts, let's take a shot on these round 2 rookies that historically have a much better chance of actually bouncing back and kind of see where things go from there. So don't buy Rashad Bateman. Don't buy Rondelle Moore. Go get Terrace Marshall, Cadarius Tony for completely free. And I think that should be it. Of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock. Let me know if y'all enjoyed this information, enjoyed this data. We're going to have so many charts like this, and I'm spending way too much time on this with the Dynasty book every single night. I just want to get it out to y'all. Let me know if y'all are interested in seeing any more of that at all. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you again. Hope you have a great day. Hope we can see you out with the video tomorrow.